Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. This is a space where we look at literature to navigate our own patterns and our own pathway, but also to see how we are connected to the world around us and how, in some way, it creates this bigger, larger community in the literary world as well as in the world where we're all just trying to make sense of what's going on, not only with our own lives, but with everyone around us. So today I want to talk to you about a memoir by Neige Sinno called Sad Tiger. And I think this is a really interesting study on writing our own story. And that's often what I really like to do when I pick up a book is to read it like a writer. And so the process of how this person is telling their story is what fascinates me, but also becomes the study of the text itself. And then, of course, there is the story in there, which I'm involved with as a reader, but then there is the lens of a writer in this space. And so I would suggest if anyone is interested in writing memoir, this is one that's interesting in the way that she decides to navigate telling her own story. So throughout the book, she will address the reader. She will indicate things that she wants you to know. She is also very clear in that she's not having huge expectations here, but that in some way she has to tell this story. And throughout, she even questions, why am I writing this story? What am I doing? Will anyone read this? Is it important that anyone reads it? So we have that kind of dialogue that's going on in the book, in addition to, her telling her story. Is this kind of doubt, and then, no, I must tell my story. No, no one's going to read this. I hope no one reads this. And so in some way, it mirrors and moves along that emotional journey that writers go through in general when they have to tell their story. However, for Sino, this is a really difficult story to tell. And in that, it's often the stories that aren't told that she has decided to bring forth. And that is about her sexual abuse as a child. And so that is her struggle back and forth, but also this need to say that it has to be told. So in her story, she does go forward and goes through legal proceedings, and it does go to court, and her stepfather admits to it and is put in prison. So we know that early on as we move through the book. But again, looking at this as a writer, we get that emotional journey of writing out your story, no matter what that story is, whether it's an intense story like this, or it's another family narrative, or something that happened to you that you want to share, or it's just your desire to write your own story. And there's always those moments of, who's going to read this? Who cares about me? Why am I even writing this? But that is the important thing, is to actually go and write the book, or to at least work through what you need to work through in the writing process. Does it turn into a book? Yes. No, it doesn't matter. It is the writing that is the process in some way to help you work through that. But I think this idea and what she addresses in these kind of asides to the reader is that there is this struggle of who would want to read this. She didn't even want to live through it, let alone have someone else read it. So I like those moments that she provides for us as the reader in this space. So I'm going to just offer one of the quotes of where she comes in and she talks to the reader directly. And this is on page 41. So, dear reader, kindred spirit, sister, I have a confession to make, for I have no desire to mislead you. Beware my words. They will always be veiled. Don't ever imagine that this book is a confession. There is no private journal, no possibility of authenticity, no possibility of lies. My space does not exist inside this text. It only exists inside me. So not only in this space is she pushing out and directing to the reader, I'm talking to you, and I don't want to mislead you. This is what you need to understand, the purpose of this book, what's going on in this book. But also it's her claiming her space here so that in some way the reader can't take over how she's guiding this book. So I thought that was an interesting aside that she put in there to try to address that with the reader. The other quote I want to read right here is, her talking about the complexity of what happened to her, how she had to shut down in some way and then work through it, and the various process, and just the layering that happens with this kind of abuse of self. And in this, she says, I am the person to whom this happened. And at the end of the quote, this is on page 66, I am all three of those girls and more. I carry all their voices within me. And so in some way throughout this text, she is trying to let those voices out. And this is also the weaving in the space of storytelling in the way that, again, looking from the lens of a writer, how do you take all these pieces of yourself and the complexity of what happened to you and who you were, who you've become, how what happened to you informs who you've become, how you don't want it to inform who you've become. And so she does this wonderful job of like taking you through that journey and to move you through that space. And there's moments in here where she talks about literature and the use of literature and the way that some people have said like go through the books. It's often something I've talked to you about here on this podcast, is that we can find our own patterns. We can in some way like recognize ourselves and characters that we read in novels or like in nonfiction or memoir, where you're like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And or I'm really interested in the way you tell your story if you're reading it like a writer, and maybe I can go about that and try to address some things that happened to me through writing. And so she has some interesting things and comments about that throughout the book. And so this quote is on page 70, and it talks about the way that people who have worked through trauma often go to art or writing in this case. And so the quote is, the person who writes, draws, and so on has already emerged from hell, which is precisely why they can write. So in this way, she's talking about it not so much as a way to process the hell, it's actually to go through the hell and then to come at it through writing. And the other one that I wanted to kind of recognize in here was this one. And this is when I think it was a friend of hers, was like kind of giving her books and like helping her to see or wanting her to heal herself through literature. And she said, literature did not save me. I am not saved. And this is, sorry, that was on page 157. And this is something she talks about throughout as well, this idea that you can't be healed from this. You can't be saved from this. It is just part of who you are. And the complexity of there is no happy ending in some way. I think she talks about in that idea of literature, that she can't write herself to a happy ending. She can't change that, what happened to her. And so to be like, oh, you've progressed and you've moved forward and now, ta-da, you're happy. And I think even that quote is like, I'm not saved, right? This is still here. This is still part of me. And going back to that other quote of I'm all three of those girls, right? There's this layering that she recognizes and that she honors in some way. And to believe in the myth of the happy ending creates this idea that there's a goal that you can get to just be all better, and ignoring in some way, according to Sino, like what happened, or at least how it formed and informed everything else that happened to her in her life. And so my final quote that I want to share with you is on page 200. And I mentioned early on that reading this as a writer and loving the way that she addresses the reader and addresses her emotions as the writer, telling her own story. And, will this be good enough? Who cares? Why would someone want to read my story? Is what I'm saying even important? Will this book even see the light of day? And this is the quote. Oh, here they come again, those insidious judgments on their little velvet feet, like cunning wolves of doubt. And I just love that she was so honest in this process and that we see those honest moments throughout the book. She could have easily taken those out, as those might have been thoughts she was having as she was writing. But I think in some way, those elements in a memoir allow the reader to feel acknowledged and recognized. And I love those spaces. I think it's an interesting way that memoirists now are doing it a little bit more. Maggie Smith was one of them recently that did that as well. That I think really helped bring that story to life, especially when it's something different to a story that you know, or as intense of a story as Sino is here. That um, it's a difficult story to read. It's challenging to um, walk alongside her in this space that where she was abused and what that did to her. So it's not in some way an easy read. It's not something that you're like, oh, that was fabulous and everyone should read it. I personally think if you're a writer and you're interested in memoir, you should read it in with the lens of watching how a writer tells their story. But be forewarned, right? This talks about some really difficult events and conversations. The other thing that I did like about this memoir, which I've talked about at other times on this podcast, is her use of other materials. So we have newspaper articles and clippings. We have discussion of photographs. At one point, she tells this story and related to uh, uh, an article, a news article that she was in, or maybe her family was in. I think it was her. And she was like, you're probably guessing why I put this in there. It doesn't seem to be related. And she was basically like, it is related because it is about my life. And so it might not be really related to this story that I'm telling you, but this is also a piece of my life. This is also a piece of who I am. And I think that is the heart of this memoir, is that not only is she taking us through the journey and the thing that became this trial, the stressor in the family, like she had to go through this ordeal as a young child and what that meant, this power play with her stepfather, but then also this continued life, like that happened, but then this happened. They were together but not together, and really trying to work through that layering of what it means to be human, how you can have all three of those girls and those voices inside you, and what does that mean, and how do you work through that, and then how do you tell that in a way that is impactful. And I think this is a brilliant memoir, Sad Tiger, in this way of her telling, her layering her story, what happened to her, but also, what this means in the larger narrative of so many women that go through this and, never tell their story, or are never given a chance to allow that voice out there. So thank you so much for joining me today. Again, not for everybody, but if you are interested in memoir, if you are interested in looking how a writer works through telling their stories, or if, you might just be interested in, but please, please, please be warned that it does talk about sexual abuse. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to connecting with you soon.